Welcome to our special coverage of Ron DeSantis's term as president. It is January 20th, 2029, so you all know what that means. Ron DeSantis, former president-elect, has now been officially made president. He was inaugurated and sworn in by the Chief Justice with many major politicians surrounding him. Here is his current popularity rating. It is a net plus 20 approval rating. His approval is at 50%, disapproval at 30%. Since Ron DeSantis was just inaugurated, many people approve of him simply because of the way he acts in public, not because of any policy. But he gets high ratings from Democrats, 17% approval, 97% from Republicans, which is very, very high, and a 70% independent approval, which is, again, quite a high margin, especially for a candidate just elected. Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Garcia also has a net 20% approval, but he has slightly lower numbers as he's not well known. 47% approve compared to 27% disapprove. He has similarly high numbers to Ron DeSantis, especially with Republicans and independents. And here is Ron DeSantis' cabinet. Every member has been confirmed as of now. His Secretary of State is Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador and vice president under Donald Trump. She was once his adversary in the Republican primaries, but after she lost to him, Haley became an avid campaigner for DeSantis on the presidential trail. Meanwhile, the Secretary of the Treasury is Peter Thiel, a businessman who has funded many GOP candidates in the past. Secretary of Defense is Dave Petraeus, a renowned general in the U.S. Army, and his Attorney General is George P. Bush, the former Texas Attorney General and Senator from Texas. On the extended list, we have Secretary of the Interior Sarah Palin, who was once the governor of Alaska. Secretary of Agriculture is Joni Ernst. She was a senator from Iowa before she became Secretary of Agriculture. Secretary of Commerce is Blake Masters, another former businessman. He actually ran for Senate in Arizona, endorsed by Peter Thiel, but unfortunately lost. Secretary of Labor is Eugene Scalia, who is the son of former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. And here is the other extended list. Secretary of Health and Human Services is Roger Marshall, who was once a senator from Kansas, resigned to fulfill this role. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development is James Craig, who was once a governor of Michigan, term limited, and decided to join the DeSantis cabinet. Secretary of Transportation is Josh Hawley, a rising star in the GOP, and it makes sense why he's getting a role in DeSantis' cabinet as to burnish his credentials. Secretary of Energy is Steve Daines, a former senator from Montana. And here we have Secretary of Education Doug Burnham. You may know him as the former governor of North Dakota. Secretary of Veterans Affairs is Dan Sullivan, who was once a colonel in the U.S. Army. Secretary of Homeland Security is former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo, and Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency is Peter Major, another rising star in the GOP. He's only around 40 years old. And we already repeated this slide, but let's look at this next slide. As you can see, we have all former senators here, interestingly enough. UN Ambassador is Marco Rubio. CIA Director is Tom Cotton. Trade Representative is Rob Portman. He was actually the only person on this list to have retired several years earlier before becoming part of the DeSantis cabinet. And Director of the Office of Management and Budget is Todd Young. A pretty good list here, and DeSantis used the GOP's vast majority of 54 seats to push through any controversial picks such as Sarah Palin. And it is January 20th, 2030. We're now a year into Ron DeSantis' term. Ron DeSantis has officially made his State of the Union address. His approval rating stands as 51% approve and 44% disapprove. We'll go into that more in depth later, though. Ron DeSantis promised to enact his goals of immigration reform, also to protect some of America's natural resources, which is something he did as Florida governor. It is pretty interesting as he's slightly out of line with the GOP's current position on climate change. He also promised to increase funds for the military and be a strong defender of Israel, which will come into play later. DeSantis made a lot of lofty goals, and he also definitely wants to keep the GOP's majority so he can enact all of them. And here is his estimated approval rating. 51% approve, 45% disapprove, which is a net +6 approval. His Democratic approval rating has dropped from 17 to 10, and his Republican approval rating is actually staying the same. Same thing with his independent approval rating. So overall, strong numbers for DeSantis. And on the midterms generic ballot, Democrats lead by around 8.3%. And as you can see, that is definitely pretty good for Democrats going into the midterms. It is quite interesting since Ron DeSantis is pretty popular, the Democrats may not do as well as they hope. and it is July 4th, 2030, with a major announcement to make. Prime Minister of Israel, Yair Lapid, has made a statement about Iran. Iran has been mounting tensions with Israel for quite a while now, and Lapid says that he will not tolerate this any longer and will make action if he needs to. And it is July 5th, 2030, the next day, and Ron DeSantis has pledged U.S. support for Israel if they do go to war with Iran. This is a very, very big announcement, showing that Ron DeSantis will make true on his promise to be a strong defender of Israel. Is actually slightly unpopular with many of the more isolationist members of the GOP, especially the American First Movement. And for polling with war with Iran, about 12% of America does not want to go to war, compared to about 42% would say yes, they want to go to war, and 54% say they do not. And Ron DeSantis' approval rating has fallen since he made this announcement. Only 46% approve, compared to 51% disapprove. His independent approval rating took a very big hit, going down from 70 to 50. His Democratic approval rating shrunk slightly. And one interesting metric is his Republican approval rating. As I said earlier, many of the America First GOP members do not want to go to war, so they actually now disapprove of him. And it is now October 2030. Prime Minister Lapid has given Iran an ultimatum for war, saying that they do not back down, he will go to war with them. This also means that the U.S. may give Israel some critical support, especially in troop movements, which Ron DeSantis has promised. And Ron DeSantis has addressed the Senate, making a case for war. It is still pretty unpopular in the United States, and he's hoping to gain support if he does go for it, so he won't be taken out of office in a landslide in 2032. And his approval rating has now gone down to a net 9% disapproval. Only 44% disapprove and 53% disapprove, while 44% approve. His Democratic approval rating has since gone down to 5%. His Independent approval rating has gone down to 30%, and his Republican approval rating has gone down to 88%. And it is now December 2030. Prime Minister Lapid has come to America addressing this joint session of Congress and making a case for war. Is actually raising a lot of support for the cause in America. His impassioned address really helped sway the minds of many Americans. And now polling shows that the majority of Americans are actually okay with war with Iran. 49.5% say they are fine with it. 45.9% say they are not. And the Senate is voting on a declaration of war against Iran. And this is quite a big, big thing. As you can see, this means this will tell if the U.S. is going to war or not. It is very split and it could really go either way. Despite the GOP Senate majority, a lot of GOP senators have said they may not vote for it, so we'll have to see. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis' approval rating has stabilized, only 49% disapprove while 48% approve. And the Senate is declaring war on Iran after their vote. 51 senators voted aye and 49 voted nay. And this is actually pretty interesting. All Democrats voted nay, and actually 3 Republicans voted against going to war. Lisa Murkowski, Suzanne Collins, and surprisingly Chris Sununu. But all the other Republicans stayed in line, which led to the declaration of war. And it's now January 2031. DeSantis' approval rating is soaring as the turn of the year. Now we go into 2032. He now has a plus 9% approval rating. The war is going pretty smoothly, and this is actually helping the GOP and DeSantis. His estimated approval rating now, again, plus 9%. His approval rating has climbed back up to 10% with Democrats, 94% with Republicans, and 65% with independents. And the war with Iran polling has about 14% saying they support it, compared to 54% say yes and 40% say no. And it's now January 2032. Ron DeSantis has announced his re-election bid. Amidst his very high approval ratings, it looks like he is pretty much the favorite to win re-election. But the Democratic field against him is quite crowded, so we'll have to see if he actually can win or who will be the Democratic nominee anyway. And is now August 2032. Ron DeSantis has declared this: mission accomplished in Iran. This was made by GOP President George Bush back in the 2000s, and it did not go well for him as Americans stayed in the Middle East for a lot longer. But Ron DeSantis is telling a different story now. U.S. troops are withdrawing from Iran and after their joint mission with Israel. And this has earned Ron DeSantis sky-high approval ratings. This comes only a few months before the election, and it will certainly help him. Here's his current approval rating. A net plus 15 approve, 55% approve, 40% disapprove, and 5% have no opinion or are unsure. Many of those are actually Democrats who don't want to say they approve for Ron DeSantis, but nevertheless, they are still on that list, and a few American First GOP members as well. His Democratic approval rating is at 15%, 95% Republicans, and 80% with independents. Ron DeSantis is very, very popular. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be making a 2030 midterms video as well, so stay tuned for that. Like the video if you enjoyed it and help it spread across YouTube. Subscribe for more content such as this. Hit the notification bell to be notified of all my upcoming videos, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.